Well, what do you think it means when someone is so attracted to the idea that they were born in the wrong body? It means so much. They're so compelled that they're willing to go through surgery to change.
God, it means all sorts of things. I knew a kid in Toronto who was on the autistic spectrum, and a lot of the people who are manifesting serious issues with gender identity are on the autistic spectrum.
This is like Abigail Schreier's work and rapid onset gender dysphoria amongst women.
Yeah, well, that's a different thing, the rapid onset. That's more like, so part of the reason I objected to Bill C-SOX 16 to begin with was because I knew full well as a clinician that as soon as we messed with fundamental sex categories and changed the terminology, we would fatally confuse thousands of young girls. I knew that because I knew the literature on psychological contagion. And it stretches back like 500 years, that literature, 300 years. It's all outlined in a book by Henri Ellenberger called History of, what's the name of the book? History of Psychoanalytic Ideas. It doesn't matter. It's Henri Ellenberger, and it's his main work if you want to look it up. And so psychological contagions are very common. And so one of them, for example, was the satanic ritual abuse accusations that emerged in daycares in the 1980s. And that was a consequence of women going into the workforce en masse, leaving their children with strangers and starting to have pathological fantasies about it, especially if they were borderline schizophrenic. And those fantasies propagated into the population.
So what does this have to do with creativity? You were talking about creativity in people that are...
Well, okay, so you see people with blue hair, the blue-haired crowd. Well, they're the same people that were doing tattooing and piercing, and they often are literally the same people because they have piercings. It's like, well, they have mutable identities. They're not stable in their identities. That's they're creative. Creative people, by definition, aren't stable in their identities. That's what makes them creative. Now, the downside of that is creativity is a high-risk, high-return strategy. Your new idea is probably stupid and wrong, and maybe it's fatal. But now and then, it's unbelievably successful. And also, now and then, our culture would die without it. So we always have this problem because we have to maintain stability because otherwise everything degenerates into chaos. But mere stability won't work because the future is different from the past. Like technically different in a non-deterministic way. It's actually different. And so then we have to figure out, well, how do we modify our memories or our traditions at a rate that enables us to keep up with the culture? And the answer to this is, in part, we let creative people play multiple games on the fringe, and some of them are radically successful, and then we copy them.